So I've seen some online pushback to the idea of validating your partner's emotions recently. And I want to get into this because I've seen some commentary like, well, if my partner's being irrational, I shouldn't validate their emotions. Or if I validate their emotions, I'm somehow giving up. I'm losing my own perspective in a disagreement that we have. And I want to address that because I don't think we have to choose between those. I don't think we have to give in on our own perspective while we're validating our partner's emotions. We can do both. And in fact, I think it's important to do both. Just on the record, as a relationship therapist, I think it's incredibly important to be able to validate your partner's emotions even when you disagree with them. And so I want to get into some basic perspectives on validation, on emotion itself, and on how we can use this important technique to grow our relationship and actually reduce conflict. Now, let me dispel one common misconception about emotion, the idea of irrational emotions. Emotions, by definition, are not rational. If we needed our emotions to be based on rationality, we'd just call them thoughts. There wouldn't be a separate word for them. But the truth is, emotions occupy a very important but different part of our psyches than our cognitive thoughts. Emotions are not rational, but ignore them at your peril. Think about ignoring the check engine light on your car. Yeah, you can put it out of your mind for a little bit, but if you ignore it for too long, you're going to pay a much bigger price. Think of emotions in the same way. If we ignore emotions in ourselves, in our partner, they're going to come back, and they're going to come back bigger, and they're going to bring friends. And so this idea that emotions have to be rational, complete misnomer, but don't ignore them or it's going to create more problems for you. It's important to remember that feelings are neither right nor wrong. They just are. Psychologist Dr. Marshall Rosenberg taught us that feelings grow out of whether our basic human needs are being met or unmet. He also taught us that our needs are personal and they're inarguable. We all have different basic human needs, and no one gets to decide what those needs are. As such, no one gets to decide what our emotions are when those needs get met or unmet. So it's important to remember that. We can't argue feelings. Now, healthy couples will argue other things all the time. Couples can disagree about opinions or beliefs or even our memory of certain facts. There's nothing wrong with that as long as we disagree in respectful, connective ways. But we can't really argue about feelings. Now, some people like to say feelings aren't facts. That's absolutely true. But remember which of those you can argue and which you can't. We can argue facts. Now, this idea of even labeling someone's beliefs as irrational is something I think we need to think really hard about, because as soon as you label someone else as being irrational, you're trying to create a power differential in that relationship, because for you to call someone else irrational, you have to immediately take the stance that there's one irrational person in that exchange, and that person is you. So the question becomes, who made you boss? Who made you the arbiter of what is rational and what is not? So I think it's really important, if we're going to have productive disagreements in our relationships, we need to suss out what is it we're arguing about. And if we want to argue about our partner's emotions, maybe all that means is that you're just uncomfortable with those emotions and you're struggling to hold space for those. Or maybe they point to something in yourself that makes you uncomfortable. That's okay too. We deal with that. Now, to be honest, I don't actually love the term validation. It's what people use, so we'll stick with it. But if you think about what validation actually means, you're not giving them permission to feel the way they do. That's not your permission to give. They already have a right to that. So think of validation in two important ways. One, think about validation as choosing not to try to invalidate their emotions, choosing not to say, hey, you don't have a right to feel that way. So when you do that, you're choosing not to try to create some kind of a power differential. You're enforcing equity in your relationship, which is always a better place to resolve a disagreement from. The other thing when we think about validation is think about validation as a kind of holding space for your partner's emotions. You're trying to be there for emotions that maybe you don't understand or maybe they make you uncomfortable, but you're going to lean into those for your partner. And when you can lean into those emotions that maybe make you uncomfortable or that you don't understand, realize that's not the end of the conversation. That's not the giving in. That's actually the beginning of creating resolution in whatever disagreement you're having. Because when your partner is having big feelings, when you can hold space for those, lean into those, then you get curious about them. You learn to ask instead of tell. And ask instead of tell is always a great recipe for moving a disagreement forward towards resolution. What does invalidation look like, and what does it mean for you if this is how you conduct yourself in a relationship? Well, I've got a list here on my laptop, and so forgive me if I'm looking away from the camera a little bit on this, please. Comments like, you don't have a right to feel that way, or that's just silly. Saying things like, your feelings are not my problem. If you're in a relationship, it doesn't mean we want to take on our partner's emotions as our own. That would be codependency. Not a fan of codependency. But if your partner is hurting and your response to that is not my problem, well, then that calls into question how invested you are in this relationship or not. Feelings aren't facts. Well, yes, we know this. I've already established this earlier. Feelings and facts are different. We have to set a different standard for them. Facts can be interrogated, evaluated, disagreed upon. Feelings, not so much. You just got to take them as they are and deal with them. Feelings and facts, if you ignore either one of them, you're probably not on a good road. So it's right. Feelings are not facts. Don't ignore either one of them. Now, let's talk about what this means for you if you really struggle to validate someone else's feelings, because that can mean a lot of different things. It could mean that you're just personalizing their emotions, that you are taking on their emotions as your own, or somehow their discomfort is making you uncomfortable. Not making their feelings your problem is one thing, but ignoring their feelings is another. Taking on their feelings as your own is a third thing that is quite another, and I think we have to be careful about that. If we fail to differentiate between thoughts and feelings, I think that just leads us on a very confusing and difficult path. I think we do need to differentiate between those two, and we need to be able to address each of those in a relationally appropriate way. See, it's important to be able to disagree with your partner without minimizing them or their experience. If we can't see eye to eye with our partner, if we are relying on power differentials, that's a form of gaslighting, when we're trying to make our partner feel like their feelings don't matter, or they're just not rational in their approach to facts and opinions. And gaslighting is not a recipe for a healthy connective relationship. Realize that relying on those power differentials, that's not a show of strength. That's a show of weakness. Because if you can't meet your partner at an emotional place or at a respectful place of disagreement about ideas, you're just showing your own weakness there. And so I think it's important that if you really want to show strength in a relationship, then a great show of strength is being able to tolerate your partner's big emotions without taking them on, but without rejecting them, but holding space for them, being curious about them, understanding them. That's validation, and that's good relationship behavior that can help bring you together. So why should you validate your partner's emotions even if you disagree with their ideas? Well, simply put, it will reduce conflict and preserve your relationship over time. It will reduce conflict by differentiating between emotion and ideas. Again, you can disagree about ideas. Healthy couples do it all the time. But when we learn to do that without invalidating the emotion and without gaslighting our partner about ideas that we might not understand or might not agree with, then we come to our disagreements from a point of equity and not a point of creating power differentials. And that's one of the ways that we preserve our relationship over time. When we can disagree with our partners with respect and caring, then that can lead us to some very productive and healthy places in the relationship. Hey friends, thank you for being here today. I'm always grateful for the gift of your time and attention. If you have questions or comments, please do leave them below. And until next time, be well.